Time for you to rethink.
You know the word annihilate? It means reduce to nothing.
Perished means killed.
We know what perished means.
Welcome, and thanks for joining us for Rethinking Hell Live, where evangelical Christians discuss what the Bible says about hell and put conventional and controversial views to the test. Join the discussion in YouTube's live chat, or email your feedback, questions, and episode suggestions to live@rethinkinghell.com. Rethinking Hell is on Facebook as well, and be sure to check us out on Patreon if you'd like to become a supporter of the show. See the description below for all links and details, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel for future updates.
Well, hello and welcome to another episode of Rethinking Hell Live. My name is Chris Date, and I'm trying to stay awake for the stream despite being rather tired for reasons I'm not entirely sure I grasp. But William, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, and I'm reasonably alert for reasons I'm not too sure I grasp either.
Good, I'm glad.
Stayed up half the night last night.
Oh, why'd you do that?
I had to get my son home from the airport. He went on a missions trip to.
Oh, that's awesome. That's really cool. I'm really happy for your son. Well, let's just go ahead and dive right in. I'll really quickly, just to get this out of the way, refresh viewers with where we're at. We've been doing a series. This is part 5, a series of videos in which we've been reviewing some work by Thomas Farrar, a Roman Catholic believer in eternal torment, who recently has done some rather scholarly and comprehensive work responding to Edward Fudge's The Fire That Consumes. And in our series, we've been interacting with that material. We're friendly with Thomas. He's a very nice guy, and he's we've been talking offline as well, and he's been saying we've been making some good points. So we're going to continue the series today. In the first 2 episodes, we talked about the Old Testament, and we talked about the intertestamental literature, and then we shifted to the New Testament. And last episode, 2 weeks ago, we covered some culturally common language in Jesus's sayings. We covered some language with which Jesus describes better and worse fates. And we left off where we left off. We'll pick up with now, which is where we're going to get into some questions of translation and interpretation on various texts. And we'll spend pretty much our whole hour and a half roughly today going through that. And then we've got still more to review in a part 6 and perhaps more beyond. Lots of really engaging material to interact with. So I'm ready to dive in. How about you, William? You good to go?
I sure am.
All right. Well, let me bring the video up on the screen, and we will resume. Here we go.
Now, Fudge avers that Jesus here equates kill and destroy, making them interchangeable. That's a quote. Quote, equates kill and destroy, making them interchangeable, unquote.
So now, William, we're going to continue with this clip in a second, but was there something you wanted to say about that?
Well, mainly what I'm going to, basically, we're going to discuss this. We're going to discuss his little table that he's put up on this slide here. Mm-hmm. And we're also going to discuss other ways he interacts with Fudge's claims about Matthew 10:28. So,
okay. All right. Well, let's continue then and unpack what he's saying.
So Fudge asserts that destroy here means annihilate.
All right. So, William, is it the case that Fudge on Matthew 10:28 in The Fire That Consumes asserts that destroy means annihilate?
Well, the reason I put these 2 claims back to back, I hope it'll be...
Oh, right. You separated this into 2 claims. One that Fudge makes destroy and kill interchangeable, and then the second claim is that Fudge makes destroy mean annihilate.
Annihilate, which is a... I mean, annihilate, when people use it in casual conversation, it certainly can mean kill.
Yeah, but that's not how a traditionalist uses it when they're critiquing annihilationism.
That's true, and we should point out that that is what annihilationists would like to be able to have the liberty to use it to mean.
That's right.
Our view, after all, is not. It doesn't have. We don't have to hold the most completely furthest possible interpretation from eternal torment. We rather have to hold the version, we have to hold a view that we think the Bible teaches. And most of us think only that the Bible is most consistent about saying the wages of sin is death, not that the wages of sin is being completely reduced from atomic matter to something that goes beyond even elimination of energy from the universe.
Right, exactly. Literal
metaphysical
obliteration. Yeah.
And you'll see, and Farrar's not, I'm not saying Farrar is falling for the worst version of that, but like when C.S. Lewis says that nothing is ever really annihilated, that even if he's talking about hell here. When you put a log in a fireplace, it doesn't become nothing, it becomes ashes.
Right.
Right.
It's funny that you bring that quote up, by the way, because in a presentation I did at a conference about a year ago, I used that quote from C.S. Lewis as an example of where traditionalist critique of annihilationism is often, quote, stunningly stupid, unquote. That's what I called it. Because it is. I mean, I love C.S. Lewis is brilliant. But when he suggested that the fact that when you burn a log, it's reduced to ash, not nothing at all, that somehow challenges annihilationism, that was a stunningly stupid claim. But anyway, go on. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
Maybe I could rehabilitate his image in that I don't think he ever thought, so there's some people who believe in annihilationism. He was more thinking, I should get people away from thinking that just to die means to be completely extinct.
Okay.
So I don't know. Fortunately, Farrar is not in general being silly. But I wanted to point out that when you engage, he is engaging against Fudge, and he's portraying Fudge as taking two different positions without noticing that. Fudge does not actually take two different positions, except when he's surveying possible views. And he doesn't do that. Not on this verse.
So then if Fudge doesn't simply and matter-of-factly equate destroy and kill as if they're interchangeable, and if he doesn't in fact say that to destroy means to metaphysically annihilate, in a nutshell, what does Fudge say?
Right. So there's two major ways that you can explain just those two words, which is what we're concerned about here, just the two words, not so much the whole context. You can say that Jesus is trying to make a big difference between destroying and killing, which is, of course, what he said, what one of his quotes says Fudge is doing. And this is also something we're going to see traditionalists do, and we've talked about a lot. They try to say, well, Jesus says kill here, but he says not kill. He says ruin. By destroy, he means ruin. So that's one way of doing it. And the other way is to actually say there's a parallelism here. And that because those two words are synonyms in Greek, Jesus meant us to take in the same way. And Fudge actually introduces both. So you can quote him to talk about both, but what you can't do is say that he is trying to prove both.
Okay. Well, so I'm going to pull up The Fire That Consumes. There we go. And I just want to walk through some things that Fudge says about Matthew 10:28, because like you, I don't want to cast aspersions on Farrar. I don't think he's being silly or obtuse, but I do think that as an apologist for eternal torment, he does what apologists for eternal torment often do, and that is misinterpret what annihilationists are actually saying, and I never understand why. But
I can maybe while you're positioning that, I can kind of suggest there's a good reason. Our position is different from theirs, where we slide. We can be seen on a prism. They're red, and we slide way over into green on that rainbow, and then they'll describe us as being all the way in blue. We slide all the way down there, and so they say nobody is ever destroyed, and we say people are destroyed, and they say, well, you must mean people are annihilated. That's amazing. That's much different from what we do. Well, we are different from what they do, but we're not that different.
Well, but all that shows then is that the misinterpretation is completely Farrar's fault. In other words, and other traditionalists, right? He's not unique in this regard. But my point is, annihilationists aren't unclear. Certainly, Edward Fudge isn't unclear in the text that Farrar is referring to. But
Let's take a look at that.
Right, we will in a second. But because Farrar, number one, denies annihilationism, and number two, is critiquing annihilationism, I think that he and other traditionalists are predisposed to misinterpret annihilationists, because what they're looking for are weaknesses in a case so that they can attack those weaknesses and thereby discredit the view that they're arguing against. But if instead the motivation were, well, let's try to understand what Fudge is saying in the first place and go from there, well, then you wouldn't run into the same misinterpretation problem. So look, here's the third edition of The Fire That Consumes, and here's what Edward Fudge says on Matthew 10:28. And just look at some of the things he says. He mentions a context that involves rejection and even killing by humans and by God. So nothing here about metaphysical annihilation, just killing that God does. Then he goes on to say humans inflict a death, but it won't be final, because God will call forth the dead from the earth and give the righteous immortality. But God's ability to kill and destroy is limitless. So we're still talking about kill and destroy as roughly synonymous. He goes on to say it reaches deeper than the physical and extends beyond the present, but he's talking about God's power, not man's, and he's still talking about killing, not metaphysical annihilation. God can kill both soul and body, both now and hereafter, right? So he's saying God, the fact that men can kill only the body, but they can't kill the soul, by contrast, God can kill both. And he goes on to say that it's the fact that God can kill not only the body, but also the soul, that therefore means the entire life of the person is completely ended. So the specific quote that I wanted to end here on was, whoops, hold on, I'm doing a quick search for, yeah. So this is the text I wanted to home in on, and here Fudge is positively affirming or positively quoting Alexander Sand's expository dictionary of the New Testament, and what he says is God can destroy the entire person because he can destroy both soul and body. So he's able. So the result, when men kill only the body, the soul isn't yet killed, and so the real self isn't, the real life, the ultimate life hasn't come to an end. But if God kills the body and the soul, the whole life, the not only the limited earthly existence, but also the entire actual life God originally gives to a person comes to an end. So the point I'm trying to get at is that throughout all of this, there's nothing that Fudge says that suggests he thinks to destroy is to metaphysically annihilate. Rather, he does indeed say that in this context, kill and destroy are being used more or less synonymously. And what he says is that men can only do that is kill the body. And notice, Fudge isn't stupid. He doesn't think that when people kill a body, the body ceases to exist, right? It becomes devoid of life. And men can't do that to the soul. They can only do it to the body. But Fudge notes that God can do that to both. And so it's the fact that God ends the life of body and soul that means the entire life comes to an end. The real self comes to an end. It's not about the word kill. It's not that he's saying, or destroy. He's not saying destroy means annihilate. He's saying it means kill, but the scope that God, that, the scope of what God can kill is greater than the scope of what man can kill, and that's what enables the final capital punishment God inflicts to extend to the entire person and not just their body.
And it should be observed that at the time the word annihilate was annihilationism was adopted into English, or that is, the theological discourse before that was about whether God would annihilate, and by that they meant destroy the whole person, body and soul, as opposed to just doing something lesser, which was seen as a partial, because there were some people at the time who proposed God would destroy the body. This was a time where Spiritism was being considered seriously. So there you go.
Now, you want to observe something else that Fudge says in his discussion on Romans 2, right?
I'll have to check my notes.
I assumed you'd be following along the outline with me, but
right here. Actually, I don't remember writing that.
Well, that's fine. I can cover it, and I've already got the passage from Fudge up on the screen here. So here on
that's
this,
great. Yes, I remember this now.
yeah. So just as further evidence that Fudge isn't in fact saying that to destroy means to metaphysically annihilate, you put in our notes what Fudge says on page 209 of the third edition. Yeah, here it is, page 209, in his discussion on the word perish in Romans 2. And so here's what he says. He says, the wicked will be revived in a mortal and corruptible body, finally to pass away and become extinct forever. And then look what he goes on to say at the very beginning of this next paragraph. This death, not annihilation in some technical literal sense, is the penal consequence of wrongdoing committed in earthly life. Fudge is explicitly denying the thing that Farrar claims Fudge believes.
If I'm right, the slide that you just showed, so if you can flip to the video, let's see if we're looking at that slide. Oh yes, the bottom bullet point starts with Second Temple Jewish 2TJ, and then up one bullet to even in English we could speak of Pompeii being destroyed by a volcanic eruption, and he's contrasting that to the claim that, it would not necessarily entail cessation of all existence. Pompeii is still there, so it's not the same as this annihilation he's portraying Fudge as saying there. But as you've pointed out, Fudge contradicts that. Yeah. It's not some technical literal sense where, the person is going to be more gone than Pompeii is.
Right, exactly. Now, I do want to preempt something, though, okay? I have heard this occasionally, but not often, because I think that the answer to the question is so intuitive, I think most people just get it. But occasionally people will ask, if kill and destroy are synonyms, then why does Jesus use two different Greek words? Because in the Greek, the word kill is apokteno, and destroy is apolumi. Now, before I answer that question, I do want to observe that it's not unusual for authors in any language to use synonyms right next to each other to mean the same thing. It happens even in the New Testament itself. You remember when Jesus I think he's telling Peter to feed his sheep? After Jesus has died and risen again, he tells Peter, feed my sheep. And he does it. He asks Peter 3 times, something like, I don't know if you remember what I'm talking about, but he says something like, do you love me? And he asks it 3 times, but he uses 2 different words for love. Do you know which passage I'm talking about?
I don't remember the location, but he uses, do you phileo me? And then he asks, do you agape me?
Yeah. John 21:15, right? So, do you love me more than these, either the food or the disciples that are there with them? And there it's agapao. It's where it's the verbal form of agape, which, by the way, just means love. The idea that it means some kind of supernatural or high quality of love is bogus. But and then after Peter responds and Jesus says, well, feed my lambs. Well, then Jesus asks again, do you love me? But now, and here again, the word is agapao. But in the third question, love is phileo. And there's no indication that as Jesus is doing this, he's fundamentally changing to some different definition of love.
Right.
So this is not unusual.
Unfortunately, you will from time to time you'll hear speakers claiming that Jesus was trying to establish this really subtle contrast, and he was asking tons of Peter before he'd say, "Do you have this self-sacrificial love for me?" And Peter's just, "I don't know, man." And then he asks, "You know what? Am I your bro?"
Right.
And
so,
okay, fine, I'll do that.
Yeah,
No, it's just love.
Yeah, so it's not at all unusual in any language, including New Testament Greek, for an author to use synonyms to mean the same thing. But
and then the question would be, can we establish this from the context? And the good news is, Farrar, once again, let me emphasize how much I like this guy. He doesn't let this go at just making a claim. He's going to draw. I showed you that. I pointed out that little table. We're going to see that table again, and he's going to explain to us why he thinks that's very significant.
Sure, I understand, but getting back to what I was saying, even though it isn't unusual at all in any language for an author to use synonyms right next to each other, right. There is arguably, and I think this, like I said, I think this is just intuitive. There is, in fact, a subtle difference between the words kill and destroy, but it's a difference of emphasis. Just for kicks and giggles, I used ChatGPT. I asked ChatGPT, what's the difference in meaning between kill and slay? Right, so here I'm talking about English, but what ChatGPT responded with, among other things, was that there is a dramatic and elevated tone to the word slay that isn't true of the word kill. And that's what we conditionalists have been, many of us anyway, have been saying about kill and destroy in Matthew 10:28, is that kill, or apakteno, doesn't have the same dramatic, elevated tone to it that apolumi, or destroy, slay, does. So number one, I'm just preempting this question before people ask it. Even if they are in fact synonyms, there's no reason why Jesus wouldn't use synonyms. He's done it elsewhere in the same breath virtually, and we do that in all languages. But number two, there is in fact arguably a difference between the two words, but it's not a difference in meaning. It's a difference in tone or emphasis. And so I just wanted to point that out. But was there anything more you wanted to say on this clip?
That's great.
Did you have anything else you wanted to say on this clip? I know we had one more thing in the notes, but you might have already covered that.
No, we have covered that. So
okay.
I think we're ready.
All right. Well, let's continue then.
Even if we translate apolumi as destroy, which we are not, we don't have to do. We could choose a verb like ruin, but even if we choose to translate it with destroy, the emphasis is not necessarily on cessation of existence, but on ruination.
All right. So there are two things we want to discuss here. One is the claim that it is perfectly legitimate to translate this as ruin instead of destroy. And then the second one is, even if it's not translated ruin, that must be the sense here. So let's cover that one claim at a time. What's your response to his claim that it's legitimate, totally legitimate to translate this ruin instead of destroy?
Well, okay. So first of all, there's a surface plausibility. You can actually, if you look it up in a lexicon, you'll find a list of places where it was translated as ruin. It's, for example, when it's used as its cognate noun, the city is now ruins. So the word ruin is being used there. And you know that does happen. It's actually pretty rare to translate this just as something weak, a weak kind of destruction, like my shirt was ruined when, I sprayed mustard on it. Since I was able to wash it and clean it, it just means it was ruined for that party. And so it's kind of weak. Greek has a lot of weaker words for destruction. Apparently the Greeks were kind of into destruction. But thora, to corrupt, would be an example of that. And if you look in lo nida, it makes the comment that it makes that same comment that you've got specifically in the article, in the footnote to the article on olethros, the word for destroy that's used in 2 Thessalonians 1:9. But, you know, so this is something people observe. There's a range of meanings, but this is kind of at the intense end. So the question is, why does he propose using a very weak word, or a very weak meaning for that? It's not very clear, and he actually doesn't explain it. We cut him off there, but that's because he actually just moves to a different topic. He doesn't explain why ruination is the sense here rather than lethality. We will discuss why we think lethality is the reason. But I wanted to point out that he doesn't. And one more thing. So I mentioned that this does appear in lexicons. So one of the things about lexicons is that they record how translators have used it in the past. So when you make a claim that a word is the sense that's intended, you should be able to find somebody who's used it that way. And you don't find people translating this verse using the word destroy, using the word ruin. It just doesn't happen. It doesn't come up.
Yeah, I thought it might be, I haven't done this, so I don't know what we're about to find, although I have my suspicions. But I thought I would just open up Matthew 10:28 here to the ESV and then just press the right arrow key. In Logos, if you press the left and right arrow keys when you're on a particular verse in a Bible, it will cycle through the various translations of the Bible that you have. So here I'm on the ESV, and what do we have? We have destroy. Here's the NASB, destroy. Here's the NIV.
Wait. What key did you press? I must know.
I told you, the right arrow key.
Just the right arrow key.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you.
I just pressed the left arrow key to go back to the ESV. So right arrow key NASB, destroy. Right arrow key NIV, destroy. Right arrow key NLT. By the way, I love the NLT, but it has some problems. Destroy.
Yes.
Here's the RSV, destroy. Here's the NRSV, destroy. Here's the King James, destroy. Here's the New King James, and we have destroy. Here's the HCSB, the precursor to the CSB, the Christian Standard Bible. It was formerly known as the Holman Christian Standard Bible. Destroy. Here's the Lexham English Bible. This is the Bible translation published by, I think, Faith Life, by the Logos folks. Lexham, people involved with Logos. And it's destroy, right? I mean, I don't know how many of these I need to go through. Here's the NET, another great translation, destroy. The New Jerusalem Bible, whatever that is, destroy. The New Century Version, whatever that is, destroy, right? I'm just going to fast forward now and see if I can find a single one that doesn't use destroy. Well, here's the Message. Nobody gives a crap about the Message. It's a piece of garbage. But here's Young's literal translation, destroy. The Cambridge Paragraph Bible, destroy. Douay Rheims, right? Destroy. Jewish New Testament. This is done by a guy named David Stern, a Messianic Christian, and it's got destroy, right? It's all destroy. So here's the point I'm trying to get at before we continue. Farrar just claims, as you pointed out, doesn't even substantiate the claim. Try to substantiate the claim, doesn't even do. Just claims that it's perfectly legitimate to translate this ruin rather than destroy. If that were true, I'm just wondering why every single translation translates it destroy. These are committee-produced translations, committees of scholars reviewing each other's work, and to a T, every single one of them translates it destroy. So I actually don't agree with...
So why? Yeah. So we claimed you could translate it with kill, but it doesn't appear with kill. Got you there?
I don't think so, because we're not claiming that you can translate it ruin or slay. What we claimed is that just to destroy is verbiage used to communicate the idea of killing in an emphatic way. Now, does that mean we could legitimately translate it as slay? Well, I don't know that would be wise.
I wouldn't have the guts to do that, not against all that tradition. But I will say this. The reason I asked that question is, of course, like any lawyer, I have an answer to it in my back pocket.
Well, tell me what your answer is.
Yeah. The reason I am not afraid to say that he's using that as a synonym for kill is not so much that there are other places where it's rendered kill, but rather, if you look up in a dictionary the meaning of the word destroy, you'll find one of its primary senses is to kill. And that's the case wherever the context tells you it's talking about a living thing. So if you destroy something that the context strongly says is living, you're primarily talking about killing it. Whereas if you say you destroy the wineskins, you're not talking about killing wineskins. You're talking about shredding them.
Now, just to be clear, we're not making a universal statement here. Sometimes people use the word destroy about a living person, and they don't mean kill them. They are speaking metaphorically or hyperbolically, right? So they might
an example, you walk away from a merchant having just bargained with him, and he waves his hands in the air, and he says, "I am destroyed."
Right. Yeah,
you ruined me.
Or two people are, posturing toward one another because they're about to have some kind of fight, and one of them says, "Dude, I'm going to destroy you." Right?
I'm going to annihilate you,
or even annihilate. Right? So we are saying there are times where it's being used hyperbolically, but context tells you that, and there's nothing in the context of Matthew 10:28 that suggests that he's speaking hyperbolically. Now, why? What justification would we offer? What evidence would we offer for thinking that this sense of destroy that is in view here is in fact slay? Well, I'm putting up on the I put this in the chat. I've also put it up on the screen so that people can find it. But this is a link to an article that Glenn Peoples published at Rethinking Hell. I would encourage people to check it out. But what he points out is that when we look at the range of meaning that was present in the entire apolleia word group. That's a group of words that hi, James. Our friend James just hopped in the chat. He points out apolleia, the word group that includes apollomy, has a wide range. But when we apply appropriate limiting criteria, like how are the same authors using this word and how are similar authors using the word, he points out the following. He says that in every single instance of the word apollomy where these criteria are met, and he lists the following criteria. It's in the Synoptic Gospels, that's Matthew, Mark, and Luke. The active voice of the word is used rather than the middle or passive. So in Greek and in English, there's active and passive voice. Greek also has a middle voice, although the middle and the passive are indistinguishable from one another usually. And if we only look at cases where the active voice is being used, because that's what's being used in Matthew 10:28, and if we look at the place where it's being used transitively to describe what one personal agent does to another, every single example refers literally to the killing of a person, and there's not a single exception. And by the way, although this isn't as universally true outside of the Synoptic Gospels, it is largely true. But anyway, he gives a few examples of the many that you can find that meet this criteria. So in Matthew 2:13, Joseph is told in a dream that Herod is searching for the child to destroy him, apollomy. Now, I'd be curious to know, Farrar, do you think that it would be appropriate to translate that ruin here? I don't think so. What about Matthew 12:14? The Pharisees went out and conspired against Jesus how to apollomy him. I don't think Farrar would say it's legitimate to translate that ruin here. Matthew 21:41, he will put those wretches to a miserable death. Now, that's a bit of a flowery translation, but again, it's apollomy, it's kill, and in the context of the parable Jesus is telling, it's clearly death that is in view. Matthew 27:20, Mark 3:6, Mark 9:22, and others. These are all examples where, like Matthew 10:28, the word apollomy is being used in the active voice in a synoptic gospel transitively to describe what one personal agent does to another, and without fail, it always is communicating the sense of destroy that is this heightened, this emphatic way of referring to killing, so slaying. So I'm open to argumentation that there is another meaning here. But without fail, and I'm curious if this has been your experience as well, William, without fail, 100% of the time, when a traditionalist argues that it doesn't mean slay, and in fact means ruin or something else, they never actually argue from the text and the context here. It's always, well, because of what these other texts in scripture say, we have to understand this in a way that's consistent with that. Are you familiar with any arguments that traditionalists have actually made based on the text in its context here, that it means something else?
Well, to be fair, I think Farrar gives an outline, although he does not give an argument for saying it's ruin. He is going to give an argument for why it's not destroy, for why it's not even kill, and which is going to be very important in a moment. So you can do that, and I've seen people, and usually when they do that, it's based on this, well, you have a parallel, and it's not exactly the same word, so it must have a different meaning.
Right.
It's an argument, and it's may even be true. It's let's be honest, it's not a bad argument. It's just
I want to agree with you on that.
It's weak.
Well, but if it's
weak,
weak,
it doesn't make the person look bad, but man, you want something better than that for a doctrine.
Sure, that's fair. Well, so should we go on to the next clip then, when he starts to try to argue for his claim, or do you have more to say on the clip that we just watched?
No, I think we'll gain from seeing his additional arguments.
All right. Well, here we go.
So also in Second Temple Jewish literature, and the text that we're going to look at are texts we looked at in more detail last time, but this literature can speak of destruction or perishing that does not necessarily entail annihilation.
All right. So I think what Farrar is claiming here is that if we look at relevant contemporaneous Second Temple Jewish literature in which the same concept of destruction is used, it's not talking about slaying or let alone metaphysical annihilation. Is that right? Is that his argument here?
That is correct, and it's an argument that I think is actually decent. Too often we get tied up in what can this be translated as instead of what's the context. But unfortunately, that's kind of the argument he's making. It's just maybe he doesn't mean that because some other people didn't mean it. Yeah, that's a little bright. There we go.
Yeah, that light is causing some glare, but people could still see your lovely mug.
Maybe it's better this way. I don't know.
So what is your response to his treatment of the Second Temple literature here?
Right. So let's flip to that. Make sure I'm pointing to the right one. Okay. So now the very bottom of the main bullet points is Second Temple Jewish literature speaks of destruction. And so we look first to 1 Enoch 10. It says that after a person is destroyed, they'll be put in a prison with the watchers. And what I looked to was Nicholsburg's commentary on that, because I don't always have time to completely analyze every passage that comes up. And Nicholsburg, later in Enoch 10, those who are sentenced, confined after their destruction, will later perish in the judgment. So you can see that the word destroy can be a little bit ambiguous there. That chapter does not tell us why they're able to be destroyed and then confined. But you can see from other passages in Enoch, like 1 Enoch 22 says that when people are killed, their souls go into chambers that are prepared for them. And so you would say, well, the person is killed, destroyed in the sense we prefer, and then their soul goes somewhere.
So
but
actually,
then the same chapter then says those sentenced will perish in the judgment. Does that mean is it a different kind? Is it not destroy but perish, or is it, or is God resurrecting them? judging them and then putting them back in exactly the same position they were just in?
Probably not.
Probably not. I think that it's very likely that they actually meant perish in the sense that a series of unfortunate events told us. Right at the very start of our program, we played a little clip from the trailer of a series of unfortunate events.
Yeah, so what I just want to point out here is actually destroy in this very example is exactly what Fudge is saying. It means to slay or to kill. And what is killed when these people are initially destroyed is their body. Like you said, some part of them survives death, but it's not their body. So that's exactly what Fudge is saying to kill means. It means they're no longer alive. And he's saying that Fudge is saying men can only do that to the body, but God can do it to both body and soul. And that seems extremely compatible with what 1 Enoch 10 is saying. People are destroyed initially to an extent that only their bodies die, but then they perish in the final judgment, which, although it's not explicit, is very consistent with God raising them and then killing or slaying both their bodies and their souls. So it doesn't sound like 1 Enoch 10 is actually doing Farrar any favors. What about the second example, 4th Ezra?
Yeah, I like that one because I spent a while trying to figure out 4th Ezra. It looked very much like it's a completely conditionalist document, and it even looks like it teaches soul sleep after the first 7 days. But of course, who cares? That's just my opinion. I'm checking a bunch of commentaries too, and they all seem to agree. The passage he's quoting here says that it tells Ezra, please don't tell yourself that you're like the wicked, that those who deserve to perish like grass. You are righteous and you will be preserved. I don't have the exact quote with me, but the perish like grass is emphatic, and they deserve to perish like grass, and they will perish like grass. How can you justify reading that as anything but, they are temporary, they'll go away, and there won't be anything left. They won't be left, at least.
In fact, let me just unpack that a little bit more, because this is 4th Ezra or 2nd Esdras in the NRSV. And notice here, the entrances. Okay, so it says, when Adam transgressed, what has been made was judged, and so the entrances of this world were made narrow and sorrowful and toilsome. They are few and evil, full of dangers, and involved in great hardships. But the entrances of the greater world are broad and safe and yield the fruit of immortality. So notice something here, by the way. We're already sounding an awful lot like conditional immortality, because it's saying you can achieve immortality through this broad and safe path. But then he continues, therefore, unless the living pass through the difficult and futile experiences, they can never receive those things that have been reserved for them. Now, therefore, why are you disturbed, seeing that you are to perish? Right? Clearly what the author is saying. In fact, he goes on, he offers a parallelism, a stereotypical Hebrew parallelism. Right after saying, why are you disturbed, seeing that you are to perish? He says, why are you moved, seeing that you are mortal?
Yes.
So in the very context here, perishing is exactly what we're saying it is. It's when a mortal dies. And in this very same context, immortality is something that can be achieved, but isn't promised to everybody. I mean, what I'm looking at is very strong support for conditionalism from Second Temple literature. It doesn't sound like it supports Farrar's argument, but am I missing anything, or is that it?
For those two examples, I found it very plausible, looking at all these commentaries, like I said, not just using my own gut feeling, that those two are talking about conditionalism. He could have picked some better examples, and we might just go and agree with him that, somewhere else in Enoch, maybe it's eternal torment. Well, there's other books where you could convince me.
I am at least tentatively convinced that 1 Enoch doesn't support eternal torment at all. And I talk about it a little bit in the chapter David Instone Brewer and I are co-authoring in this book I'm working on with Paul Copan. So we won't say more here, but
It's true that it's for the older books like Enoch, it's much harder to really pick up a clear signal of eternal torment, and it looks like a lot of the time when they use figures that look like it, what they're saying is that the final punishment is permanent,
which is
there's
something
nobody getting out of it.
Exactly, and that's something that David Instone Brewer and I argue in that chapter I mentioned. Okay, well, so that's not all that Farrar offers as far as an argument for thinking that it doesn't mean slay. Shall we continue to see what more he has to offer?
Let's go.
But the parallelism that we find in Matthew 10:28 is an antithetical parallelism. It's not a synonymous parallelism.
All right. So what Farrar here is arguing is that whereas Fudge makes the claim, Fudge makes the claim, as we've already discussed, that destroy and kill here, apakteno, kill, apolumi, destroy, are synonymous. And what Farrar is suggesting is that would make sense if this were a synonymous parallelism, but he thinks that it is in fact an antithetical parallelism. Now I have some thoughts here, and I'll share them. But before I do, did you want to say anything on this, or?
Well, I mean, one thing we'll agree on that I know already is that in this case he's accurately quoting Fudge, right? It's that our argument is indeed that those two are intended to be synonyms. Now we're going to disagree with his parsing of them, and I like that table, but there's some funny things about it that we'll see in just a second.
Yeah, and if I don't tee you up to talk about that table when we get there, let me know. But let me tell you what I think about Farrar's claim that it's not a synonymous parallelism, it's an antithetical one. I actually think that he's both right and wrong. And here's what I mean by that. If I put the biblical text back up on the screen. So Farrar is right that there is an antithetical parallelism here, but it's not what he thinks. Right. It's not in the words kill and destroy. Rather, what is antithetical is what men can't do versus what God can. That is what is antithetical. What men can't do, what God can. So, and
also our response to it. Fear. Do not fear.
Yes, that's right. So that to that extent, Farrar is right that there's an antithetical parallelism here, but where Farrar is wrong is in claiming that there's not a synonymous parallelism between the words kill and destroy. So first of all, it seems to me that the reading that is natural, the natural reading of this text, is that the God is to be feared because he can do what men can't.
And let me point out something even more interesting. He's in this particular chapter, he doesn't mention men. He doesn't limit this to men. He's talking about everyone who can't kill the body, or who can kill the body but cannot kill the soul. In other words, those who would threaten to do that. And then he turns around and says, but this one person, this one, fear him. Right? And the reason I make such a big deal of that is that you've got this really big group who can not kill the soul, but fear this one. You should fear this one. The other ones don't fear. This one you should fear. And that antithetical, by putting the emphasis, pointing out that this is about fearing, we see that the one we should fear is the one who can kill the soul.
Right.
Because if he couldn't kill the soul, you shouldn't fear him. He's just one of those in the big group. No matter what his name or title is, if it's Lucifer, you still shouldn't fear him.
Right. And yeah, absolutely. But the point that I'm trying to make here that's most relevant to what Farrar is claiming is that the antithetical thing here isn't between the meanings of the words kill and destroy, but rather between the ones we shouldn't fear because they can't do something, contrasted by the one we should fear because he can do what the others can't.
Yeah.
And if that natural reading is the right one, then that's only further evidence that destroy is synonymous with kill, because what men can't do, namely apakteno, the soul, kill the soul, is the thing that God is able to do, which is why we should fear him. But there's one other piece of evidence here, at least, which is that we already heard Farrar in a previous clip in last episode say that Luke records Jesus saying exactly that men can kill and do no more, but God can kill and do more. So if both Matthew and Luke are recording the true gist of Jesus's words, then we have every reason for thinking that kill and slay are indeed synonymous, because together both texts are making the same point. Don't fear those who can't do something, fear God who can do it. Yep. And what the men can't do in Matthew 10:28 is apakteno, kill the soul. So we have every reason for thinking that that's what he's saying God can do, is kill the soul. And it makes further sense that he would use an emphatic word for kill, like apolemy, destroy, right?
Yeah. Well put.
All right, but he continues. I'm guessing it's in responding to this next clip, maybe, that you'll home in on that table. I don't know.
I think so.
Okay, well, we'll find out. Like I said, if at some point I missed that, let me know and we'll talk about it. But here's the next clip we have lined up.
So because there's a threefold contrast, it doesn't seem logical to argue that kill and destroy are being used synonymously here. Rather, destroy is a stronger verb than kill that denotes something that God is able to do that a human being cannot do to another human being.
All right. So we just heard him reference a threefold contrast, and I think that's that table that he has up there.
Yeah, and so we should keep that table up there to see, is that true? Body, not soul, and both body and soul? Well, okay, so he's kind of right. I don't know if it's really a threefold contrast, because when you don't mention something on one side, like the aware, it really doesn't matter, right? That's not a point of contrast. It's just driving the nail in, not, it's hitting the table harder when you're making your point, not the same thing as not being parallel. Yeah, kill and destroy are put in parallel. Body and soul on both sides are in parallel. I mean, the fact that both are mentioned. The fact that the soul isn't affected is not in parallel, and that certainly is important. But what he's left out is fear. Okay, and for me, that is the argument. For me, missing fear is missing his whole argument because of the way he limits fear. He says, don't fear anyone who can't kill the soul, and then he says, fear God. So that's my argument, and I already kind of introduced it. Do you think I've run over that enough times, or
well, I think you make
one more time?
No, I think you make a good point that the emphasis of this passage is the very thing that doesn't appear on Farrar's table here, namely that one group we're not to fear and another group we are to fear. But I'll be honest, I'm not sure how that reality, the reality of what he left off the table, how it lends support more to our view than to his. That part hasn't been clear to me.
Fair enough. So
unless, and maybe this is what you're getting to, and if not, then clarify, but I do think this is worth mentioning. Glenn Peoples has often pointed out that given that this is about we should fear the one who is truly fearsome and not fear the ones who aren't, in light of that, Fudge or Glenn Peoples has often objected to those who claim that the text only says God can do it, but not that he will. And his point, and his response to that argument is, okay, but if God isn't going to do that, then Jesus hasn't offered any reason to fear him and not the others. And the way Glenn Peoples has put it is like, he might as well say, fear the one who can turn you into a chicken. Well, number one, I don't know why that's fearful. I'm much more fearful of these people who are going to kill me. But number two, if he can do it, but he's not going to, then why would that make me fear him? But so maybe that's the direction you're going. I'm not sure. Correct me if I'm wrong.
That is very important. But my point is more along the lines of pointing out that that's an essential parallelism. And it is the primary point of antithesis between those. Fear, do not fear. It's an absolute point. It's not like someone saying, I know you fear those who can make you uncomfortable, but you should really fear the guy who can torture you. That's degrees of fear.
Right.
This is nothing like that. It's don't fear.
I see.
Don't let them make you blink. You know, you're charging straight ahead. You're preaching the gospel. They tell you stop or we'll kill you. Pay them no mind. There's nothing they can do to you. They ultimately they can't even carry out their threats. In fact, he'll say that in a couple of verses, but not Farrar. We're not really parsing the whole verse here. But what they can do temporarily is just partial. And whereas when you're thinking of disobeying someone, you should really be afraid of the real threat, the one that's an absolute and not just a worse version.
Okay.
It's an absolute thing.
Okay.
And that's killing, not, partial ruining versus more complete ruining, a little torture.
Yeah, that's a fair point too. I do want to pick apart this table a little bit though, because there's some things that occurred to me. First of all, he's offering this table as illustration of what he's calling a threefold contrast, but at least two of these three rows just don't even belong there. The where row doesn't belong for the reason you said. Just because it doesn't mention where they can kill it doesn't mean there's a contrast. But I also think the top row doesn't belong because he's begging the question, right? He's assuming that apokteno and apollumi are contrasts, and so he's putting them on the table as if they are a contrast. But that's an assumption, and so he's offering his assumption as evidence of the thing he's assuming. I mean, it's textbook circularity. So all that really, Matt, go ahead. You were going to say something.
No, it's a fair point, but I wouldn't say I want him to take that off the table because it's begging the question, because he's actually trying to demonstrate that that's a good place to put them, that they're actually in the contrast.
Well, but
but you've got a really good point there. Why are those things on the table at all? Even any of them? How are they a contrast?
Well, and that brings me to that middle one, and that's the only one that comes close to accurately representing an unassumed contrast, right? If we don't assume from the outset that apokteno and apollumi are contrasts, the only thing that we actually have contrasted is, number one, the fear, the ones not to fear versus the one to fear, as you pointed out. And then there's only one other row, if we're talking about what is actually being contrasted explicitly, right? Without reading our assumptions into it. And that is the contrast is between those who cannot kill the soul and God who can destroy the soul. Yes. That's the contrast.
Because killing the body and destroying the body are, you can ask whether they're the same thing, but they look like they're the same thing.
They look like the same thing, but more importantly, you can't just assume they're not the same thing and therefore chalk it up to a contrast. So if we don't capture in the table what isn't assumed, then we can't put kill the body and destroy the body as contrasts, because they very well may be the same thing.
That's a much better job of saying why he should put fear into that table than I was able to do.
I don't know.
That's the one thing we know for sure. He's absolutely clear that fear and not fear are opposites.
Well, right. So there's two things that are clear apart from assumptions in terms of what's being contrasted. One is whom to fear, right? There are those we shouldn't fear, and he whom we should. And then there's what the first group can't do, which is kill the soul, and there's what the second one can do, which is destroy the soul. That is a contrast, no matter what kill and destroy mean.
Right.
So those are really the only two things. And once you capture that as accurately as what is being contrasted, you lose all of Farrar's argument. There just is nothing in that argument, in that contrast, that suggests that kill and destroy are different. Quite the opposite. Those two rows that do belong in the table of what's contrasted are extremely consistent with our claim that the natural reading of this text is that kill and destroy are synonymous, albeit one is more emphatic. No?
Nice.
Yeah, well, anyway, any more on that clip before we continue?
I like that. Thank you.
Okay, do you want me to continue with the next clip then?
Yes, let's go.
Okay. I don't know if you were distracted by a family member or something, but all right. Here we
Yeah,
go.
that's what happened.
Okay, no worries. No worries.
The specific area of contrast is in the intensity, because killing is something that, one human being can do to another, and it affects the body, and it's limited in scope. And destroy both body and soul in Gehenna is referring to something entirely of a different quality.
So, just a bald, unsubstantiated claim that to destroy body and soul in Gehenna is of a fundamentally different quality than killing. What's your response to that?
Well, I mean, yeah, is it? I mean, not based on how we built the chart. It kind of might be based on how he built the chart, except that his chart doesn't actually prove what he wanted. So I think we've kind of established that, right? So that would overcome my argument about fear versus not fear if it were true. But that would only work if the one who did the destroying was also killing, right? Because otherwise you would not fear him.
Yeah, right. Because the parallel in Luke does say God, after the killing, can do more. Excuse me.
Well, also, we're not to fear those who cannot kill the soul. If he actually meant that, if Jesus was actually positively teaching, using the word destroy in order to avoid teaching killing, then this verse would create a contradiction. You're supposed to fear the one that he just told you not to fear. Paradoxes are always hard to teach, but
so let me make sure I understand you, because I think this is a good point if I'm following correctly. So if destroy is something of a fundamentally different quality and that is fearful, whereas killing is not, then what sense would it make for Jesus to say that the first group can't kill the soul and therefore don't fear them? Well, wait a minute. If kill is already not fearsome, right, and that destroy is fundamentally fearsome, then there would have been no point for Jesus to point out that the group not to be feared can't kill the soul. That would have been utterly superfluous. Is that the point you're making?
Well, more than superfluous, it would sound like Jesus is trying to say, don't fear anyone who can't kill. And by the way, God can't kill. Or at least he won't. Because we're telling you about destroying in Gehenna, but by destroy, I mean not killing.
Okay.
These are opposites. If that's then Jesus would be creating this weird, I can't call it a paradox, it'd just be a contradiction, right? A paradox is a puzzle. A contradiction is not a puzzle, it's just wrong.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I mean, it's just every single look at this text, right? If it were like a diamond and you look at it from all sorts of different perspectives, every single one just strongly cries out against everything Farrar is saying about this text, and
we do love this verse, don't we?
Well, and I'll mention this too. I'm going to put this up. I'm going to put this in the chat for people because I think that it will be useful. I did back in let's see here, 4 years ago, January of 2021. I did this deep dive into Matthew 10:28. People can check that out. I think it'd be useful. But there too, I pull out even more stuff that we haven't talked about here. And of course, we've talked here about things I didn't cover in that video. It's like every single time I return to this text to do some digging into it, I find more reason to think that it is absolutely militates against eternal torment and universalism and is absolutely very clear support for annihilationism. But anything more you wanted to say on this clip before we continue?
Let's see. No, those are my notes.
Okay. All right. Well, let's continue then.
And the basanos word group, which is what's translated tortured here, it's often used in early Jewish literature for the sufferings of hell.
So the basanos word group. So the basanos word group is basanos is the noun torment, and basanizo, I think, is the verb torment. And we must have gone to a different context now, no longer 1028, because basanos word group isn't here at all, right?
Right. And just to remind you, my general approach this whole series, what I did was I grouped together Farrar's arguments that were on a single topic or on a single theme. And in this case, the theme is translation and interpretation. And
I'm just curious what the context is here. Like, what is there a particular passage he's talking about in this case, or just some of the passages we know use those words like Revelation, tormented forever and ever, or?
I don't have like an outline of his presentation right here, but my impression is that his intent in this slide, and probably in the general context, was to talk about translation, words, what they mean and how we should interpret them. In this case, he's got a whole bunch of verses that he's put together. I will remind you, I do recommend watching Farrar's presentation, just for our viewers who are interested in engaging. He presents his own case, and I am not attempting to present his case. In fact, I'm trying to cut it down, so that's not fair to him. So be fair and give him a chance to present his case. But this is where I wanted to introduce the idea that we want to translate torment by something else, and we shouldn't do that. So you've heard what he said, that this torment is used to describe the sufferings of hell. And then he produces a bunch of verses. Oh, and here we go. It's often used in early Jewish literature for the sufferings of hell. That's about in the middle of the slide here.
Well, and
so that makes sense, right? What other word would you use for the sufferings of hell? Torment is a great one.
Yes.
That's what it means, by the way. It means torment. If anybody tells you it means to destroy, they miss the point. That's not what the dictionary lists. If anybody says it means to test, as for the purity of gold, no, not in the Bible.
No,
not in biblical literature.
That's what universalists often argue, and they argue without any substance to that argument at all. But I've answered my own question by looking more on his slide. I think so. First of all, let me say what I think you might have said a second ago. Oh man, my pharmacy's calling me back at the worst time, but that's all right. Hopefully they'll go to voicemail. So first of all, the basanos word group refers to psychological and or physical torment / torture, whatever. Mm-hmm. And we don't deny that. And our view is one in which the resurrected lost on the final day, the day of judgment, they're not just slain like instantaneously, like God snaps his fingers as if he's Thanos and the wicked disappear or something. No, it's a violent, painful death, like most forms of execution are. So the idea that there would be some kind of torment or pain or misery or whatever in hell leading up to and as part of the process by which the wicked are finally destroyed, that's not at all inconsistent with our view at all. Quite the opposite. It's expected. But I think that what he was going to get at, although I don't remember what he goes on to say in the final clip we have lined up for today, which is what we're going to play in a moment, but based on his slide, it looks like the reason that this Basanas word group question comes up in this context, well, we've put them together, right? They're at different points in his presentation, but they fit well together here because we've just been talking about Matthew 10:28 and how the word apollumy is used there. And there are a couple of places where it's used in those ways in the Synoptic Gospels where there seem to be parallels, or at least traditionalists will often argue there are parallels to those passages in the Synoptics where instead of destroy, it's torment. And so he's got an example up on the screen. He mentions Matthew 8:29.
Now, that in a second. That's in he'll say that in the continuation.
Then
so
I'll
actually, we could play that and then go into a broader discussion because that is the last clip.
That's what we'll do now. So let's go ahead and continue his clip. And this is the last clip we have lined up for today. We'll comment on this, and then when we're done, we'll bid our adieu and come back in a couple of weeks, if possible, to move on to part 6. So here we go.
In 4 Maccabees would be one example. So elsewhere in the Gospels, we can find in the parable of rich man and Lazarus, Luke 16:19-31, which we'll come to shortly, but also in Matthew 8, verse 29. And this is the account of the Gadarene demoniac. It says, "Suddenly the demon-possessed men shouted, 'What have you to do with us, Son of God? Have you come here to torment us before the appointed time?'" And the Greek noun translated time there is kairos, which has the sense of an appointed or designated time. So the implication of the demon's words here is that there is an appointed time when evil transcendent beings are destined to be tormented. And as we find in Matthew 25:41, which we quoted earlier, wicked humans share the same eschatological fate as wicked transcendent beings, because the wicked humans in that text are consigned to the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. And so if we read those two texts together, which I think we have ample reason to do, then that eternal fire is a fire that torments.
All right.
And as we mentioned in the previous...
That was the end. Okay.
Yeah.
Now I've got some thoughts on this, but you go first. What are your thoughts on what Farrar just said there?
Right. So, of course, in the sense of the main topic I was talking about, translation, my first point is that no, we don't claim that torment should be translated as anything other than torment. And Chris, you just gave your very nice position statement on it, that, yeah, it's a great word for that. But here he makes a more specific argument that because the demon uses the word torment, because the demon uses the word torment about an appointed time, that therefore that appointed time must refer to the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels and for all people. And yes, I can see why you might propose that the times have the same starting point, but to propose that they're all that really means the eternal fire, that it's like the same scope as the eternal fire, seems really unjustified when all it is that there's a time for torment. That's basically my thoughts about that particular parallel. Now, how long will that torment be? Most of the passages that talk about that call it a day of wrath.
2 Thessalonians 1.
A time could be endless, but a day can't. And it actually, those passages talking about the day of wrath, you'll find things like Romans 2 that says he will repay them wrath and tribulation and distress on the day of wrath. Could he keep going? Sure, why not? But why would he keep going after he's repaid them on the day of wrath? They didn't deserve that. They deserved the wrath that they were due, not something additional.
Yeah, you'd have to basically say that it makes sense to say that the day of wrath is in fact the eternity of wrath.
Yeah.
Which fine. If somebody wants to make that claim, I'd be interested in hearing an argument for that claim. But I've not heard any arguments for that claim.
And I have brought this up before. I've made the claim day means an amount of time. I mean, 24 hours most commonly. You can even ask Walton about Genesis, and he'll say, yeah, it most commonly means 24 hours.
But even if it means something a little bit, it
can mean 1,000 years too.
But it's always a finite duration of time.
Yeah. So that's the point.
No, I think so. That's all really good. So, in addition to the day of wrath, the fact that it's a day of wrath, not an eternity of wrath. In addition to that, you made the point that, if I understood you correctly, and I would agree with this, Farrar is just assuming that because some intertestamental literature refers to an appointed time at which demonic beings will be tormented in hell, or something like it in final judgment, and therefore the only possible meaning of the only possible referent of the appointed time here in Matthew is that same appointed time. And that's a big assumption, number one. And number two, because there could be other appointed times at which the demons were anticipating Jesus sending them to be tormented. And then number two, he's assuming that if the appointed time is an appointed time for demons to be tormented, then it must be that's all that happens and they never ever die, and it's just forever torment. But it seems to me that both those assumptions are unfounded. They're not. He doesn't even attempt to substantiate them. So
it's just, it would be reasonable to apply these two together, and sure it is, but it doesn't really tell us whether that appointed time is the day of wrath or whether it's the eternity after it,
or something long before the final judgment. The Revelation. So Revelation, for example, I think you and I are both what I hate calling it this, but I'm going to do it for the purpose of this discussion. I think we're both partial preterists, right?
Actually, I'm not.
Well,
I'm a partial preterist for some texts, but not Revelation.
Okay, well, you're wrong there. Well, that's fine. So this is the point I want to make. There are many of us preterists, and here again, I'm referring to what is colloquially known as partial preterism, but it doesn't need to be. Full preterism isn't full of preterism. It might be full of something else, but it's not full of preterism. Anyway, most of us partial preterists understand the millennium in Revelation 20 to be something that began in the first century. It is a symbol for a very long period of time that began in the first century, and we're still in now. Now, if you don't understand Revelation that way, fine. It just means you're wrong. But here's a point I want to make. For those of us who are partial preterists, we point out, or we talk about how in Revelation 27, or sorry, Revelation 23, verse 22, chapter 20, verse 2. The angel seized the dragon, that ancient serpent, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years and threw him into the pit and shut it and sealed over him so that he might not deceive the nations any longer until the 1,000 years were ended. And then later, toward the end of the 1,000 years, Satan is released again. Now, I'm not here going to unpack all that from a partial preterist perspective, but the point I want to make is that for those of us who do understand this in a preteristic way, Satan is bound in some way long ago, 2,000 years ago, and he's still bound in that way, or he might have already been loosed and we're approaching the end of the period of time symbolized by the millennium, but that's another question. The point is, something happened to Satan wherein he was bound in some sense, and it is symbolically represented here as being thrown into a pit. Now, I think it's entirely plausible that Satan, it's not just Satan here, but satanic, everything that Satan and his minions would do to try and deceive the Goyim. That's what I think that this text is about. That Satan and his minions are no longer able to prevent the gospel from going out into the Gentile world. That's what I think the nations is a reference here to. But and I'm not expecting viewers to accept that. But what I am saying is, if that view is right, or partial preterists who understand that to be what this text is talking about, could very easily say that there was an appointed time in the first century where Satan and possibly other demons might be tormented in some way, and the onset of their torment would begin, and it would continue to last until whenever Satan is released from, symbolically, from this pit into which he's thrown in Revelation 20. So that's an example where the assumption that the appointed time referred to in Matthew 8:29 must be the appointed time in hell. No, it could actually be, if partial preterists, or at least a partial preterist reading of Revelation 20 is correct, it could in fact be an appointed time in the first century, similar to what Enoch talks about, where the watchers are bound in prison until their final judgment on the last day or whatever. So the first assumption that Farrar makes, that the appointed time must be hell, is already an assumption that is unwarranted. Could be, right? It could be what it's in reference to, but the assumption isn't justified. But then as for the second assumption, that if it's an appointed time at which the demons anticipated being tormented, it must not therefore be a time when that torment culminates in their death, their destruction. That assumption is wrong too. Because as we just got done talking about a minute ago, our belief is that the finally impenitent are going to be slain, destroyed, not by a finger snap and instantaneously vanishing into the proverbial ether, but rather by being violently and painfully killed, destroyed. And I don't think that's only true of the human wicked. I think it would be true of the demonic realm as well. So if the demons anticipate them being destroyed in hell by a process that also includes some degree and duration of torment, and we think that's true of the human wicked as well, well, then that too would make perfect sense of the what the demons are saying here. And again, the assumption, the second assumption I called out that Farrar is making, that if it's an appointed time for torment, it must be an appointed time for torment only and forever and nothing else, that assumption is unwarranted as well. So like, it seems to me that Farrar's argument is here based on two at least assumptions that are not only unsubstantiated, but as far as I can tell, he doesn't even attempt to substantiate them. And I just want to make one more comment, and then I'll turn things over to you to see what further thoughts you have. Sometimes Farrar didn't do this, but I do want to rebut those traditionalists who do, and there are some of them. We conditionalists will sometimes point out some of those occurrences in which apollomy is used in the active voice transitively. We say that everywhere that's done in the synoptic gospels, it means slay or kill. And what traditionalists will sometimes point out is that two of those occurrences, Mark 1:24 and Luke 4:34, are cases in which demons express their fear of being destroyed. Right. In using that same word apollomy in the transitive and active voice, or the transitive sense and active voice. And what some traditionalists will do is then point out, okay, but there are these parallels in Mark 5:6 and the one that Farrar has been talking about, Matthew 8:29, in which demons plead with Jesus not to torment them. And so what the traditionalists will say is, well, look, in these other cases, they use apollomy for destroy, but in these parallels, they use basanizo or basanas for torment. So clearly, destroy can in fact mean torment rather than destroy. But this is the response I offer to that in a footnote in my contribution to that book I'm co-editing with Paul Copan. I say Mark 5:6 and Matthew 8:29 record demonic beings pleading with Jesus not to torment them, but this takes place on a separate occasion from those passages in Mark 1:24 and Luke 4:34. So these texts, that is Mark 5:6 and Matthew 8:29, do not support the notion that eschatological destruction just is torment. They may expect to be tormented in the near future and destroyed in the distant future. That was what I was proposing vis-a-vis or by means of a partial preterist reading of Revelation 20. Or perhaps they expect to suffer torment while being destroyed. So in addition to everything that we said in response to Farrar, there's also this additional point to make to those who claim that Mark 5:6 and Matthew 8:29 are just parallels to Mark 1:24 and Luke 4:34, proving that apollomy in the latter can just mean torment, which is what is explicitly said in the former. And in response to that argument, we can point out, well, actually, they're not parallels. It's a whole separate occasion. And furthermore, there are these additional possibilities as far as what the demons, whether when they expect to be tormented and whether they expect to be tormented as part of their destruction. And traditionalists never address those possibilities. They just assume what they assume. So anyway,
when we say never, we mean typically.
well, I mean, I've
Yeah.
never encountered a response to
It happens so much that they'll quote this passage about demons concerned about a time torment before the time, and not notice the destruction before the time that's in the other verses, which are not exactly parallels. Or they'll even cite them both, and they'll use them to say that obviously destroy means torment. And this is exactly the kind of problem that really Farrar is warning against. He is making a very good warning that you should not assume a passage means something other than torment when it says torment. And we'd also like to say that you should probably explore the close meanings of the word destroy before you go off and assume, well, it means never destroy, if I may be a little rhetorical there.
Yeah. No, I agree. One last thing I'll just point out here. I'm just going to read a few sentences from that same chapter I've written for that book I'm quoting with Paul Copan. I'm just going to read this paragraph. Jesus says the eternal fire is prepared for the devil and his angels. I'm quoting there Matthew 25:41, thereby implying that they too will be destroyed, because by this point in my chapter, I've built up to the argument that I've been making. This is not an allusion to the long-lasting but temporary imprisonment of the watchers popularized by the Book of Enoch. That imprisonment, as Richard Bauckham explains, was to be, quote, until the day of judgment, when they will be cast into Gehenna. And then he references not only 1 Enoch 10:12, but he cross-references with 2 Peter and Jude. Rather, I go on, eternal fire is the fate yet awaiting the demonic host, including any currently bound in netherworldly chains. Intertestamental literature does not speak clearly to what will happen to such beings on the day of judgment, but the gods of Psalm 82, often thought to be lesser divine beings by people like Heiser, right? Michael Heiser, and he's not the only one. There are others who think this as well. Those divine beings, if that's what they are in Psalm 82, are promised that one day they will die like mortals, right? That's in Psalm 82 verses 6 and 7. And then I go on to mention that the next verses where demons express their fear of being slain or destroyed as well. So we've actually got a few indications that demons will in fact be destroyed, not merely tormented, undestroyed for all eternity. But this raises another objection that I want to preempt, and I do preempt in my chapter. I go on to say this would not contradict Jesus' assertion in Luke 20:36 that resurrected saints cannot die anymore because they are like angels. And the reason it wouldn't contradict that is because in Matthew's parallel to that Lucan text, Jesus specifies specifically righteous angels, angels in heaven. So if Matthew and Luke are both, capturing the gist of what Jesus said, but Matthew makes clear that Jesus is talking about the righteous angels, then that there is no implication that it's impossible for demons to die. And then finally,
and of course, the passage doesn't say it's impossible; it just says they don't.
Well, right. Well, actually, I'm not sure that's true. Let me pull that up really quick, and then I'll finish the
let's
paragraph.
take a look at that. We have plenty of time. If you're alert.
Yeah, I am. So so actually it's interesting. Matthew doesn't mention the fact that the risen wicked cannot die, but Luke does. So in Luke 20:35, those who are considered worthy to attain to that age and to the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage, for they cannot die anymore. The Greeks,
because they are like the angels, being sons of God,
exactly,
and sons of the resurrection.
Right.
So what I would say there is that they can't die because they're like the angels. Well, how are the angels, able to not die? How can they not die? Well, they're made of stuff that doesn't die, and that's
maybe.
That because I think what we see in other passages is that angels are incorruptible. Yeah, they're made out of a substance you can't damage.
Well, and I think that's what the traditionalist is assuming when they make this argument.
Yeah.
And what I'm
I
saying
think
is
that's correct. You can't. Angels don't age. You can't poke them with a spear, even if you had a spiritual spear. They bounce right off of it. If you had Hulk
and I think
with a spiritual spear, they bounce right off of it.
and that is possible. That's what the traditionalist is assuming, but it's by no means clear that that's what's going on, because again, in the parallel, and it is a genuine parallel, in Matthew 22:30, Jesus explicitly says, like angels in heaven. So it's also possible that the inability for angels to die is because he's talking specifically about the righteous angels who will never die, and humans will be like righteous humans, saved humans will be like them. But let's say you're right. Let's say that.
Well, I would also look at Psalm. We mentioned, was it Psalm 82?
Mm-hmm.
So what you have there is, I have said to you, you are gods, yet you will die like men.
Right.
And the contrast there suggests that by admitting they're gods, which he does, which the whole scene is set that they are gods, would imply they won't die. And so God is saying, I'm just going to make this. I'm going to make this happen. I don't care what you think your rights are.
That is a plausible read of that. I don't think it's the only plausible one. I think it
certainly is not. I didn't mean to imply that.
Sure. Well, so the point I'm trying to get at,
in the story, in the surface story, they can't die. And then God says, nevertheless, you will.
But the question is, who can't die? Is it all divine beings called gods, or is it righteous angels called gods, and or those who at least at one point are in God's good graces, but once they fall out of those graces, maybe they no longer qualify as such and will in fact die like mortals? But look, we don't have to hash that out here. The point I'm getting at is, it's not the only way to read it, but let's assume it is. And my point is that the fact that Matthew explicitly says it's angels in heaven suggests another possible reading, which is that the angels that cannot die are the ones that are in God's good graces and God will never destroy. But let's say you're right, and let's say that, especially with Psalm 82 in the background, the reason why Luke records Jesus saying that the resurrected righteous will be unable to die because they'll be like angels is because because angels of any sort, fallen or otherwise, are made of stuff that means they don't naturally die, right? That could very well be. But even then, conditionalism isn't challenged because, and this is the conclusion to my paragraph I was reading, their being unable to die naturally would not preclude God supernaturally ending their lives.
Right.
Even the most ardent believer in eternal torment, at least with any kind of education or self-study or whatever, will say, well, yeah, of course God could destroy them, right? Because the only being that is or will ever be ase, right? The only one that will never be contingent is God. So if it were the case that angels literally could not possibly be destroyed, even at God's hand, then they too would be ase. They would be God like God is. So That's clearly not what is going on here. So the fact that even if you're right, and angels are unable to die naturally, that wouldn't preclude God from destroying them supernaturally. And in fact, the author of Hebrews says that in Hebrews 2:14 that the Son became incarnate to destroy the devil. And the verb katargeo there means to cause to cease to exist, according to the Louanita lexicon. So for multiple reasons, this is all I was trying to get to. For multiple reasons, this whole line of argumentation, both from Farrar and other less careful traditionalists, just doesn't hold up under scrutiny. At every point, their arguments fall apart as challenges to conditionalism. But anyway, I've rambled here for a while. Is there anything more you want to say on this or any of the other clips we've played today before we bid our viewers adieu?
In a phony French accent.
In a terrible, terrible French accent. Adieu. I can't do it.
Okay. Yes, I do have a comment. We just quoted Farrar talking about how this is used in Second Temple Jewish literature. And if you haven't gotten a chance to watch our earlier episodes of this, We go into that in good detail, I believe. I think it's a fascinating topic, and he pushes it pretty hard in his Old Testament series, so that's where we've spent more time addressing it. Fascinating stuff, but we're not ignoring it. We've already addressed this.
Yeah. So if anybody's watching this right now and has not seen any of the previous videos in this series, it would very much behoove such viewers to go watch those and get caught up as we continue our series. So just as a bit of a teaser for what's to come, I'm just going by your organization of upcoming clips in our outline. So we're going to be talking about some texts that use the language of place, right? A place where people are cast into hell and where there's weeping and gnashing and stuff like that. We're going to be talking about metaphor versus literal and explicit stuff versus implicit stuff. We're going to be talking about imprisonment and inescapability of texts that seem to talk about imprisonment or inescapability. And then we're going to get to Luke 16, where all of those features sort of converge. And then we'll get to a few other things, including the language of Golgotha, possibly, and some text in Revelation. But those are some of the things that we'll cover in parts 6 and whatever additional parts we do. Like last time, Will, you and I can offline, asynchronously discuss whether 2 weeks from today will work. But that's what I would encourage people to tentatively place on their proverbial calendar, if not their literal calendar, is 2 weeks from today. That'll be Monday, August 25th at 6 p.m. Pacific, the usual time. But again, I'll work with you, William, offline to make sure that day and time works. And if it doesn't, then, people, if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, click that notifications bell. I would highly encourage you to do so, because that way, when we schedule our next entry into the series, as well as anything else, you'll get a notification of it. So, William, thank you so much for your time. I've really appreciated it. And as usual, you've been a stimulating interlocutor, and you always provide very keen insights, and I'm always learning from you. So thanks. I very much appreciated your time.
Thank you so much, Chris. Yourself as well.
All
always double checking. That's how we sharpen each other.
That's right. Well, and you make some good points about Psalm 82 as it pertains to what I was saying about those parallels in Matthew and Luke. So we learn from each other. All right, everybody. Well, thank you so very much for your time, and we'll see you either in 2 weeks' time or some other cadence. Either way, subscribe and click that notifications bell so you can find out when we're going to stream next. See you next time.
Man, look, maybe we should rethink this whole thing. I mean, you heard the guy.
The pains of eternal torment.
Yeah, I gotta rethink this whole thing.